There are people who move through the world quietly, not because they have nothing to say, but because somewhere along the way, their hurt learned to live without sound. You notice them in small moments, in the way they pause before answering, in the way their eyes soften when the conversation grows heavy, in the way they smile, gentle, practiced, almost convincing, while a deeper story waits beneath. Silence becomes the room they live in, a place where thoughts echo, untouched by interruption, a place where emotions settle like dust on old furniture, visible only when the light hits just right. This is the psychology of people who hide their hurt behind silence. People who learned long ago that quiet can be safer than truth, and that sometimes the softest voices carry the heaviest worlds. It usually begins small. A moment of disappointment, a comment that lands wrong, a feeling that wasn't understood or welcomed. For some, silence starts as a shield, a way to stay unnoticed, a way to prevent conflict, a way to hold themselves together when words feel too fragile to speak. They become the person who says it's fine when it isn't, the person who carries their pain like a secret weight, the person who keeps conversations light because depth feels too vulnerable, too exposed. Silence is misunderstood as strength. But for them, silence is survival. It's the quiet nod in place of an explanation, the retreat into their own mind when emotions rise, the belief that if they don't speak their hurt, they won't be hurt again. What others see as calm is often a heart trying its best to stay unseen. These patterns rarely come from nowhere. They are built slowly, over years of emotional conditioning. Maybe they grew up in homes where feelings were dismissed, where crying was called dramatic, where expressing discomfort was met with irritation or blame. Maybe they loved someone who turned their vulnerability into a weapon, who used their truths against them, who taught them that saying how they feel only makes things worse. Or maybe they simply learned that speaking up changed nothing, that their needs were too small, too inconvenient, too complicated. That silence created fewer ripples than honesty ever could. So they adapted. They learned to read rooms before entering them, to anticipate emotional weather like seasoned forecasters, to monitor every word before it leaves their mouth, rehearsing safety over authenticity. Their silence is not emptiness. It's a map of every moment they felt unheard. Psychology calls this emotional inhibition, a coping mechanism formed when the brain perceives vulnerability as a threat. The nervous system plays its part too. When conflict or pain rises, their body activates a subtle freeze response. Not dramatic, not obvious, just a quiet shutting down. The mind chooses silence as a way to stay regulated, to avoid deeper overwhelm. Neuroscientists describe how repeated emotional invalidation changes neural pathways. The brain becomes wired for caution. It learns to predict danger in the form of emotional expression. It prioritizes safety over connection. But the paradox is this: the more they hide their hurt, the heavier it becomes. Studies show that unexpressed emotions don't vanish. They lodge into the body: tight shoulders, quiet headaches, shallow breaths, restless nights. Silence becomes internalized stress, a psychological holding pattern, a weight carried not in the mind alone but in the body that houses it. And yet, inside something resists. There's a part of them that wants to be understood, a part that wishes someone would ask twice when they say, "I'm okay." A part that dreams of being able to speak without fear of consequence. But another part warns them to stay quiet. It whispers that people leave when things get heavy, that feelings scare others away, that vulnerability is a luxury meant for someone else. This is their internal tug of war, the desire to be seen versus the fear of being exposed. They rehearse explanations in their mind, but never say them out loud. They feel their emotions rise like waves, then swallow them whole before they crest. They hold apologies they never owed. They carry stories no one has heard. They become the safe place for others while having no safe place for themselves. This conflict creates a quiet ache, an emptiness not from lacking words, but from having too many unsaid. The turning point rarely arrives with drama. It comes quietly, almost unnoticed. Maybe someone finally listens without rushing them. Maybe they feel seen in a way that does not demand explanation. Maybe they realize that silence hasn't protected them. It has only isolated them. There's a moment when they recognize the truth, that the world they created inside themselves is too small for everything they feel. And so the shift begins, not with volume, but with honesty. A single sentence spoken without fear, a confession whispered into the dark, a tear allowed to fall in the presence of another human being. This moment is subtle, but monumental. It is the beginning of giving themselves permission to exist not just in silence, but in sound. Healing for them is not loud. It is not a dramatic transformation. It is slow, delicate, and deeply internal. It begins with recognizing their emotions before hiding them, with allowing themselves to feel without judgment, with understanding that silence was a strategy, a smart one, a necessary one, but not the only way anymore. They learn that not all silence is protective. Some silence is inherited fear. Some silence is confusion. Some silence is simply habit. Integration means reclaiming their voice at their own pace. Sometimes a word at a time. Sometimes only through breath. Sometimes only through presence. Healing's the moment they realize that expressing pain does not make them a burden. It makes them human. And that the right people will not run from their vulnerability. They will stay. They will listen. They will meet that silence not with impatience, but with understanding. In the end, people who hide their hurt behind silence are not mysterious or unreadable. They are simply carrying histories that never had room to breathe. Their quiet is not emptiness. It is experience. It is memory. It is survival shaped into softness. If you look closely, you'll see that their silence is full of stories. Stories waiting for safety, not attention. There is nothing weak about them. Their resilience is quiet, but immense. Their emotional world is rich, even if unspoken. And when they finally find a place where their voice can land gently, where their truth can exist without fear, their silence becomes something else entirely. Not a shield, not a prison, but a choice. A space of peace rather than suppression. A breath rather than a barrier. A calm that is earned, not forced. Because healing does not always sound like speaking. Sometimes it sounds like finally being able to rest.